The bathroom tiles were cold against Nia's cheek, a stark contrast to the fire radiating from her side. Every breath was a negotiation with pain, a shallow, jagged intake of air that threatened to shatter the fragile stillness of the house. It was raining outside, a relentless, heavy downpour that hammered against the roof, masking the sound of her whimpers, but doing nothing to drown out the heavy footsteps pacing in the hallway. Derek was out there. The floorboards creaked with the familiar, predatory rhythm of his patrol, the same way he stalked a suspect, only this time the perimeter was their living room and the suspect was his wife. She curled tighter, her hand trembling uncontrollably as she clutched her phone. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb fracture running diagonally across the glass from where he had slapped it out of her hand earlier, but the glow was still there, a lifeline in the suffocating dark. She needed help. She couldn't call 911. Derek was the law. The last time she had tried, the responding officers had shared a beer with him on the porch while she iced her lip in the kitchen. She needed family. Her vision blurred, tears mixing with the blood trickling from a cut above her eyebrow. Her thumb hovered over the contact list, aiming for her brother's name, but the tremors in her hand were violent, born of shock and adrenaline. She tapped a number, her coordination failing her, and didn't check the digits before her thumbs flew across the keyboard. It was desperation distilled into text. "He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. Please help me." She hit send and let the phone slide from her grip, her head falling back against the porcelain tub. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the ominous thud of Derek's boots stopping just outside the bathroom door. The handle jiggled. "Locked. For now." The phone buzzed against the tile, a single vibration that felt like a gunshot in the quiet. Nia flinched, terrified that Derek heard it. She dragged the phone back to her face, squinting through the swelling of her left eye. The message wasn't from her brother. The number was unfamiliar, an international code she didn't recognize, followed by a local relay. The reply had come within seconds. "Who is this?" Nia's heart hammered against her bruised ribs. A wrong number. She had cast a message in a bottle into the ocean, and it had washed up on the wrong shore. She didn't have the energy to type an apology. She was going to pass out. She let her eyes close. The phone buzzed again, insistent. "Send your location." The command was blunt. Then a third message, terrifyingly precise. "If you are hurt, tell me where you are. I have resources." She didn't know why. Perhaps it was the dying embers of her survival instinct or the fatalism of someone who knew the door wouldn't hold much longer, but she sent the location pin. A minute later, the screen lit up with a final message. "I'm on my way. Do not unlock the door." Derek's voice cut through the wood, calm and terrifyingly professional. "Nia, open the door. You're creating a disturbance." It was his cop voice, detached, authoritative, the voice that made juries trust him and criminals fear him. He didn't sound angry anymore, which was worse. He sounded like he was managing a situation. "I know you're in there texting. Who are you telling lies to? You know what happens when you involve outsiders." He kicked the bottom of the door, a sharp, controlled strike meant to test the frame. Wood splintered. Nia dragged herself into the corner, wedging her body between the toilet and the wall. She watched the door frame flex. He would be in soon. She looked at the phone. The unknown number had gone silent. She had summoned a stranger to a slaughter. Or perhaps she had just screamed into the void. The rain intensified, sounding like gravel thrown against the siding, a chaotic symphony to accompany the inevitable violence. The waiting was a distinct form of torture. 10 minutes passed. Derek had stopped kicking and had gone to the garage, likely to retrieve the toolkit he used to dismantle locks without leaving evidence. The silence of the house was suffocating. Nia focused on the pattern of the floor tiles, trying to disassociate from the pain in her torso. Then the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a change in pressure. The rain outside seemed to be competing with a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated the toothpaste on the sink's edge. Tires on gravel. Heavy tires. Not a patrol car. The sound of an engine cutting off was followed by the slam of car doors. Not one, but several, sharp and synchronized. Derek heard it too. His footsteps in the hallway stopped. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered, his voice drifting through the cracks. The front door, which Derek had locked with his obsessive triple deadbolt routine, shuddered. There was no knock. There was no announcement of police presence. No request for entry. There was simply a deafening crash that shook the entire foundation of the bungalow. The sound of the front door being obliterated, likely by a battering ram or a breaching shotgun, echoed through the house. Nia gasped, clutching her chest as the shockwave of noise hit her. Then came the shouting, but it wasn't the chaotic yelling of a brawl. It was Derek screaming, "Police officer, put the weapon down. I am a—" His voice was cut off by a sickening thud, wet and heavy, followed by the clatter of his service weapon sliding across the hardwood floor. The silence that followed was absolute, terrified, and cold. Then, footsteps. These were not the heavy, plodding boots of her husband. These were soft, quick, expensive leather soles moving with fluid purpose. "Check the perimeter. Nothing leaves this house," a voice commanded. It was a baritone, smooth as velvet but edged with razor wire. It wasn't loud, yet it carried through the house with terrifying clarity. "Find her." The footsteps moved closer to the bathroom. Nia stopped breathing. She saw the shadow under the door change. Someone was standing there. The ruined lock, already weakened by Derek, gave way with a gentle push. The door swung open. Standing in the threshold was a man who looked like he had walked out of a high-stakes boardroom and into a war zone. He was Korean, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that was currently damp with rain. His face was unreadable, carved from cold marble, but his eyes swept the room with the intensity of a weapon sight. He spotted her wedged in the corner, blood on her face, terror in her eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He simply lowered his gun, a matte black pistol with a suppressor, and stepped into the room, filling the small space with a scent of ozone, gunpowder, and expensive sandalwood. "You are the one who texted," he stated, not asking. He crouched down, disregarding the blood on the tiles that might stain his trousers. Up close, Nia could see the sharp line of his jaw and the cold fury simmering behind his dark eyes. He wasn't looking at her like a victim. He was looking at her like a broken object that had been stolen. "My name is June. You asked for help." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. Nia flinched, a reflex carved into her by years of Derek's discipline. June frozen instantly. His expression didn't soften, but his gaze shifted, darkening as he looked at the bruise blooming on her cheek. "He did this?" June asked softly. Nia couldn't speak. She only nodded. June stood up abruptly, his presence towering over her. He tapped an earpiece. "Secure the mail.
Do not kill him yet."
"I want a conversation first." He looked back down at her. "Can you walk?" Nia tried to move, but the pain in her ribs flared so violently that her vision whited out. She gasped, a ragged sound that made June's jaw tighten. "No," she whispered, shame burning her throat. I can't." She expected annoyance. She expected him to leave her there while he dealt with business. Instead, June holstered his weapon in a fluid motion beneath his jacket. "Then I will carry you." It wasn't an offer. It was a statement of fact. He bent down, sliding one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. He was deceptively strong. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, holding her close to his chest. The movement sent a spike of agony through her side, and she cried out, burying her face in the lapel of his suit. "Breathe," he ordered, his voice vibrating against her ear. "I have you. We are leaving." June carried her out of the bathroom and into the hallway. The house, usually a shrine to Derek's control, was now a wreckage site. The front door was lying flat in the entryway. Mud and rain streaked the pristine floors. But it was the living room that stopped Nia's heart. Derek was on his knees, zip-tied, blood streaming from his nose. Two men in tactical gear stood over him, faces covered, rifles at the ready. Derek looked up as June walked past, his eyes widening when he saw Nia in the stranger's arms. "Nia?" Derek choked out, struggling against the restraints. "Nia, tell them."
Imakop.
"You can't do this." June stopped. He didn't turn his body, just tilted his head slightly toward the kneeling man. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a lethal static. June looked at Derek with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a virulent bacteria. "A badge is a shield for brave men," June said, his voice quiet enough that Derek had to strain to hear it over the rain. "For you, it is merely a costume to hide a monster." June shifted his grip on Nia, pulling her slightly tighter, a possessive gesture that Derek didn't miss. She called the wrong number. June continued, his eyes dead and cold. But she found the right man, he signaled to his guards with a subtle nod. Bring him. We have a long night ahead. June turned and walked out into the storm. The rain hit Nia's face, cold and shocking, washing away the heat of the tears. A convoy of 3 black armored SUVs idled in the driveway, their engines purring like restrained beasts. The world outside the house looked different now, darker, dangerous, but for the first time in years, the danger wasn't directed at her. It was surrounding her, a wall of steel and violence standing between her and the man who had promised to love her. The back of the middle SUV was a mobile command center, bathed in low-level blue light. June placed her gently on the leather bench seat, his movements precise and careful, treating her body like fractured porcelain. A man in a gray sweater sat on the opposite bench, older, with a medical bag open on his knees. Doctor, June said, his tone leaving no room for delay.
Ribs.
Possible concussion. Lacerations, the doctor moved instantly, his hands gloved and efficient. June didn't sit. He stood by the open door for a moment, looking back at the house where his men were dragging a struggling Derek toward the rear vehicle. Nia shivered, her teeth chattering from shock and the cold rain. June turned back to her, seeing the tremor. He stripped off his suit jacket, revealing a white dress shirt and a shoulder holster, and draped the heavy, warm wool over her shoulders. It smelled like him, power, rain, and something metallic. We're going to a secure location, June said, climbing in and signaling the driver. The heavy door thudded shut, sealing out the sound of the storm and Derek shouting. The silence inside the vehicle was hermetic. My medical team will assess you fully when we arrive. Nia clutched the lapels of his jacket, the fabric rough against her fingertips. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. He was terrifyingly handsome, but there was a darkness in him that matched the night. Why? She rasped, her voice broken. Why did you come? It was the only question that mattered. People didn't just show up for strangers. Not like this. June watched the doctor check her pupil response with a penlight. He rested his hand on the seat back near her head, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. Fate is rarely accidental, he murmured, his gaze locking onto hers. You asked for a savior. You got a sinner. But tonight, I am your sinner. He reached into a cooler compartment and pulled out a bottle of water, cracking the seal. Your husband is police. That complicates matters. It means the system you usually call for help is the enemy. He handed her the water. You are outside the law now, Nia. Because you are with me. The realization hit her harder than the pain. She hadn't just escaped. She had defected. She had traded a domestic prison for a criminal empire. The drive was a blur of city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Nia drifted in and out of consciousness, the adrenaline crash pulling her under. The doctor gave her something for the pain, a small injection that made the fire in her ribs dull to a distant throb. She felt the car slow down, the gravity shifting as they ascended a steep incline. When the door opened again, they were in an underground garage, vast and sterile, filled with luxury cars that looked more like weapons than transport. June was there again, lifting her before she could try to move. He carried her to a private elevator. The numbers climbed, higher and higher, leaving the grit of the street far below. The doors opened directly into a penthouse that spanned the entire floor. It was a fortress of glass and steel, overlooking the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, a sprawling grid of gold and amber lights, but to Nia, it looked like a map of a world she could no longer touch. The space was beautiful, minimalist and cold, decorated in shades of slate and obsidian. This is my home, June said, walking past a wall of windows. It is the safest place in the city. No warrant reaches here. No badge opens these doors. He carried her into a bedroom that was larger than her entire house, laying her down on a bed with sheets that felt like silk water. Rest, he commanded, stepping back as the doctor entered the room with a nurse in tow. June stood at the doorway, a sentinel in a white shirt, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. We will discuss your future when you wake. Nia looked at him, her eyelids heavy. And Derek? She whispered, the name tasting like ash. June's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He is currently a guest in the basement, June said, his voice devoid of any warmth. He has many things to answer for. Breaking what belongs to me is a capital offense, Nia's breath hitched. Belongs to me. The words hung in the air, a promise and a threat intertwined. She closed her eyes, the darkness taking her, knowing that she had traded the monster in her bed for the dragon at the door. The digital clock on the bedside table read 3 a.m., glowing softly in the cavernous darkness of the master suite. Nia woke not with a start, but with a slow, heavy drag into consciousness, her body feeling like it had been reconstructed from lead. For a terrifying second, the silence of the room felt like the prelude to a blow, the kind of quiet Derek used to weaponize before an explosion. She flinched, her hand flying to her ribs, but instead of the sharp bite of untreated fractures, she felt the stiff, supportive embrace of a medical brace and the softness of high-thread count cotton. The air was cool, filtered, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive cologne. She wasn't in the bungalow. She wasn't waiting for the door to be kicked in. She turned her head, the movement slow and stiff, and found him sitting in a wingback chair by the floor-to-ceiling window. June was awake, or perhaps he never slept. He had discarded his tie and unbuttoned the collar of his white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were corded with muscle and marked by a faint, jagged scar running down his left wrist. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, swirling it gently, the ice clinking with a sound that seemed too loud in the stillness. He wasn't looking at the city lights below. He was watching her. His gaze was heavy, a physical weight that pressed her back into the pillows. "The pain is manageable?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. It wasn't a polite inquiry. It was an assessment. Nia nodded, her throat dry. "Water," she rasped. Before she could try to push herself up, June was moving. He set his glass down and crossed the room with that fluid, predatory grace, picking up a carafe from the nightstand. He didn't just hand her the glass. He sat on the edge of the oversized bed, the mattress shifting under his weight, bringing him into her personal space. He slid a hand behind her neck, his fingers cool and strong against her feverish skin, and lifted her head gently. "Drink slowly," he commanded, tilting the glass to her lips. The intimacy of the act was staggering. Derek had never cared for her injuries. He had only caused them. This stranger, this dangerous man who commanded armies, was holding her with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Nia drank, her eyes locked on his. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his chest. "Why?" she whispered again, the question haunting her. "I'm just a wrong number." June lowered her back to the pillows, but didn't pull away. His hand lingered near her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw where a bruise was fading from purple to green. "There are no wrong numbers in my world, Nia. Only paths that intersect." His face hardened slightly, a shadow passing over his features. "You called out into the dark. I answered. That creates a bond." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "And now that you are here, inside my walls, you are no longer a statistic. You are mine to guard." The possessiveness in his tone should have terrified her. It echoed the control she had just escaped, but coming from him, it felt different. It didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a fortress. He stood up, breaking the spell, and walked back to the window. "Sleep. The wolves are outside, but I am the hunter in this house." 2 days bled into 3. The penthouse was a world unto itself, a suspended reality disconnected from the timeline of the city below. Nia's recovery was measured in small victories, sitting up without gasping, walking to the bathroom without the room spinning, and the slow, terrifying return of her appetite. She hadn't seen a phone or a television. June had isolated her completely, a digital detox enforced by armed guards at the elevator. But he was always there. He worked from a massive glass desk in the living area, speaking in rapid-fire Korean into a headset or reviewing documents with a lethal intensity. He never raised his voice, but the tension that radiated from him when he was working was enough to make the air thin. On the 4th night, the rain returned, lashing against the panoramic windows. Nia walked out into the living area, wrapped in a silk robe June had provided, black, obviously, matching the monochromatic aesthetic of his life. She found him standing on the balcony. The glass doors slid open to admit the damp, electric air of the storm. He wasn't wearing a jacket, the wind whipping his shirt against his torso. He looked like a statue carved from solitude. Nia hesitated, then stepped out into the cold. June. The wind stole her voice, but he heard. He turned, and for the first time, she saw fatigue etched around his eyes. He held a phone in his hand, not his, but a new one. A sleek, silver device. Your husband's precinct has declared him missing under suspicious circumstances, June said, his voice flat. He walked over to her, blocking the wind with his body. He held out the phone. The narrative is being controlled. They believe he was taken by a rival gang. They do not know about you yet. Nia stared at the device. It was a lifeline, but also a test. My family, she started. They don't know, June nodded. This phone is encrypted. It cannot be traced by the police or the federal agencies looking for your husband. You may call your brother. Tell him you left. Tell him you are safe. Do not tell him where. He placed the phone in her hand, his fingers closing over hers. Why can't I tell him? Nia asked, fear spiking. Because if they find you, they find me, June said, his eyes locking onto hers with intense gravity. And if they find me, this sanctuary becomes a battlefield. He stepped closer, crowding her against the glass railing. The city sprawled below them, a grid of lights that felt a million miles away. I have enemies, Nia. Powerful ones. By bringing you here, I have painted a target on this building. He reached out, tucking a stray curl of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering on her neck. I did it willingly. But you must understand the price of this safety. You are hidden. You are a ghost. You belong to the shadow now. He waited, giving her the choice to reject the phone, to reject the terms. Nia looked at the screen, then at the man who stood between her and the abyss. She realized with a jolt that she didn't want to leave. She wanted to burn the bridge back to her old life. She unlocked the phone. The dynamic in the penthouse shifted after the phone call. An unspoken contract had been signed. Nia wasn't just a refugee. She was a resident. She began to move through the space with more confidence, no longer hugging the walls like a frightened animal. But the shadow of Derek hung over them, a ghost that refused to be exorcised. One evening, while June was cooking, something she found shockingly domestic for a man who killed people for a living, she sat at the kitchen island, watching his precise knife work. He was slicing vegetables with the same surgical focus he applied to his operations. Where is he? Nia asked. She didn't need to say the name. The knife stopped moving. June didn't look up, his gaze fixed on the cutting board. He is secure, June replied, the temperature in the kitchen dropping instantly. He is alive, if that is your concern. Nia shook her head, a sudden surge of anger overcoming her fear. That's not my concern. I want to know if he can hurt me again. I want to know if he's coming back. June set the knife down with a deliberate click. He wiped his hands on a towel and walked around the island until he was standing directly in front of her. He will never touch you again, June said, his voice dropping to that dangerous velvet register. I have dismantled his life. His badge is gone. His reputation is ash. He is currently learning the definition of helplessness. June placed his hands on the counter on either side of her, trapping her. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. But you're still afraid. I see it when you sleep. I hear you cry out. His expression softened, a crack in the armor. I cannot erase the past, Nia. I can only butcher the future until it is safe for you. He reached out and took her hand, placing it flat against his chest, right over his heart. It beat steady and slow, a heavy rhythm of controlled violence. You asked for a protector, he murmured, his eyes searching hers. I am not a good man. I have done things that would make you scream. But for you, I am a wall. I am the weapon you point at the world. The air between them crackled with tension, a mix of fear and undeniable attraction. Nia felt drawn to the darkness in him because it recognized the darkness in her own trauma. And what do you want in return? She whispered, her breath hitching. June's eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her lips before snapping back to her eyes. Everything, he said simply. I want your loyalty. I want your trust. I want you to look at me and not see a monster. The peace was shattered on a Tuesday. It started with a perimeter alarm, a soft chime that escalated quickly into a blaring siren. The lights in the penthouse turned red, emergency shutters slamming down over the panoramic windows with the sound of guillotines falling. Nia froze in the hallway, a book dropping from her hands. June materialized from his office, a submachine gun already in his hands, his suit jacket gone, his holster visible. He moved with terrifying speed, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the entryway. "Security breach," he said, his voice calm but rapid. "Lobby level." They bypassed the biometric scanners. Is it the police?" Nia asked, breathless, as he hustled her toward the master bedroom. "Worse," June said grimly. "Mercenaries. Paid for by someone who wants to reclaim your husband's honor. Or perhaps my rival's sensing weakness." He shoved her into the walk-in closet, which she now realized was a reinforced panic room. He tapped a panel on the wall, and a rack of weapons spun out. "Stay here. Lock the door. Do not open it unless you hear my voice." He turned to leave, but Nia grabbed his arm. The muscles were hard as rock. "June," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't die." It was a selfish plea, but it was also a confession. She couldn't survive this without him. June paused, looking back at her. The adrenaline had dilated his pupils, making him look wild. For a second, he looked like he might kiss her, a desperate, final kind of kiss, but he held back. He brought his hand to her face, his thumb sweeping over her cheekbone. "I have no intention of dying today," he growled. "I have not yet claimed my reward." He pulled away, the steel door sliding shut between them, locking with a definitive thud. Inside the darkness of the safe room, Nia watched the security feeds on a hidden monitor. She saw the hallway outside the elevator. Smoke grenades filled the corridor. Laser sights cut through the haze. She saw June move. He was a blur of efficiency, a dancer in a ballet of bullets. He didn't just shoot. He controlled the space, moving from cover to cover, his shots precise and lethal. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. But then, a lucky shot clipped his shoulder. Nia screamed in the silence of the room, her hand pressing against the screen. He stumbled, blood blooming on his white shirt, but he didn't fall. He returned fire, dropping the last assailant with a double tap to the chest. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard, looking directly at the camera as if he knew she was watching. He was hurt, and he had bled for her. The aftermath was a flurry of medical staff and cleanup crews, but June waved them all away from the master suite. He sat on the edge of the bed, his shirt cut away, a bandage wrapped tight around his upper arm. The bullet had grazed him. Painful, bloody, but not fatal. Nia stood before him, a bowl of warm water and a cloth in her hands, insisting on cleaning the surrounding skin herself. The power dynamic had shifted. He was the injured one now, and she was the caretaker. The silence in the room was heavy, not with threat, but with the weight of what had just happened. He had gone to war for her. Nia wrung out the cloth, her hands steady now. She wiped the dried blood from his chest, tracing the hard lines of his muscles. "You're hurt," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You took a bullet." June watched her, his eyes hooded. The pain medication was kicking in, softening his sharp edges. "A small price," he murmured. "I told you. I am your shield." He caught her hand, stopping her movements. His grip was weaker than usual, but still possessive. "Did you see?" he asked, his voice rough. "Did you see what I am?" He was asking if she saw the killer, the monster. "I saw a man who kept his word," Nia whispered. She stepped closer, stepping between his knees. She wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned away in the gunfire, leaving something harder, brighter. She placed her free hand on the side of his face, her thumb stroking his cheek. "You didn't ask for a savior." She echoed his earlier words, reclaiming them. "You asked for a reason to fight." June leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a brief second, surrendering to the contact. "You are dangerous, Nia," he groaned, opening his eyes to look at her with raw, unfiltered hunger. "You make me want to burn the world down just to keep you warm." He pulled her down, not roughly this time, but with an insistent gravity. She went willingly, sitting on his lap, careful of his injury. Her hands found purchase on his shoulders. "Then burn it," she said, her voice a vow. "Burn it all. I'm not going back to the ashes." June's hand tangled in her hair, pulling her face to his. When he kissed her, it tasted of iron, whiskey, and a dark, terrifying promise. It wasn't a sweet ending. It was a declaration of war against anyone who would try to separate them. They were no longer survivor and rescuer. They were accomplices. And as the rain continued to hammer against the glass, washing the city clean, Nia knew she had finally found the right number.